Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Fantasy Fiends podcast. We are here for a long overdue episode, and that's my fault because I've been crazy busy this summer. And before this podcast, Andy had to listen to me just complain. It's probably the fourth week Andy's had to hear me complain about my disorganization skills. But we'll get into that on Stevie's Tangent. That's like the new part of the show. It's like a 5-minute tangent that I go over. So I'm here with my co-host Andy Peliquin. And today we are honored to have C.A. Szarek, and she is oh my God. I've been doing this for a year now and can't get it right. And she is the author of the series, The King's Riders. And we are going to be diving into book 3 today. And apparently it starts out with a murder. So welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Hi, Stevie. Thank you for welcoming me to my podcast.
You're so welcome, Andy. So welcome. What was I going to say? So, CA, welcome to the Fantasy Fiends podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate y'all. It's fun.
Oh, you definitely are from Texas.
Not originally, believe it or not, but I've been here a really long time.
Okay, where did you get the y'all from? We got Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma.
Texas. That's from Texas. I'm originally from Ohio, but I've been in Texas since 2002. So you just pick things up. You can't help it.
You were like the 6th person I met this year from Ohio.
Really?
Yes, I've just attracting all these Ohioans.
You notice we don't stay there. We kind of
that's seriously, everybody tells me that, like, there's nothing to do there. So
it's a lot smaller than where I live now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's like when I first moved down here, it's overwhelming in how many people there are. Where I'm from, there's like 15,000. So it's quite a culture shock, sort of.
Oh yeah, in Dallas, no offense, but I know a lot of people that move away from Dallas just because of how crazy it is.
Yeah, and also, and it's funny, it's hard to find a native Texan. Like most people that you talk to are from other places. Mm-hmm. They came here from work or for, in a lot of cases, cheaper housing, stuff like that. The cost of living is pretty good here.
Where I am, everybody's usually Texan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I'm in a small town by Austin.
Oh, well, that's why. Yeah.
Like farmland and no Wi-Fi. So
that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, exactly. So we like to start off these podcasts by talking about something cool that we did this week. I know Andy has a lot of cool stuff. I'll let Andy decide if he wants to talk about his cool stuff. But for me, I got to play Dungeons and Dragons over the weekend, which was a lot of fun. And I forgot how hard it was to keep up with. It's so freaking hard to be the dungeon master. I mean, because of course my brother likes to break the game. So he's always like, I want to do this. I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. So it's just me telling a story the entire time. And it's really fun. And it's got me wanting to finish editing Jigsaw, which I will be finished tomorrow, and write the next book. So that's something cool that I did. And we were at the beach. So that was a lot of fun. What about you, Andy?
Okay, so today is the official launch day of Dark Blade Savior, the 6th and originally the final book in my Hero of Darkness series. I'm loving the series so much that I will continue writing it, but for now, this is book 6. It sort of ties up everything. It totally shatters the world as you, the reader, know it. It basically finishes the first story arc for the character and sets into motion world-changing events that will shape the course of my fantasy world. And so I'm really interested to see how much more I can get into it if I can keep writing these books, put out maybe 12 or 13 total, but that's down the line. For now, I'm just happy that finally I get to tell this ending of the story that I've been looking forward to for about 3 years now.
Well, congratulations on having a book out. That's awesome.
Thank you.
It's always good. And with the recent success of book 1, it just goes right into book 6. So
yeah, it's nice. It's nice to know that people are actually reading that far, because when I was doing the series before, it was like with the longer time gaps between each launch, maybe the sell through was 10% of what it was. But now, because I'm launching them closer together, you can actually track each month or each time the new book is released. Like I've seen the pre-orders for each book increase almost not exponentially, but visibly, because there's been that, the read through from all of the books.
That's fantastic. I love when that happens.
Yep.
Definitely. So, Chrissy, and for everyone out there, her author's name is C.A. Szarek, but we're gonna call her Chrissy on the show.
Yeah, I just use my initials. There's no, when I started writing fantasy, there was. I'm hoping it's not like this anymore, but there was a stigma with women writing fantasy at one time. So I used my initials. Well, and also it's kind of cool. So that's really the basis behind it. But yes, my name is Chrissy. It's not a secret. So
there is actually still a little bit of an unconscious or subconscious bias towards women in the genre, just as there is towards men in the romance genre. It's not like when people sit and think about it, they'll be like, okay, no, I'm okay with a woman writer, which sounds ridiculous, but
yeah,
this is where we're at, or I'm okay with a male writer of romance.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, they don't ever sit down and take that. They'll just look at the title and the name of the author, like, nope. It's an unconscious, subconscious thing. So a lot of female fantasy authors I know, and a lot of guy romance authors that I know, they'll choose things like C.A. Szarek or T.N. King, these names that could be, gender neutral. And it does help to sort of stop that bias, because I know when a lot of fantasy readers pick up fantasy novels that are visibly written by women, they're like, oh, there's going to be way more romance in this than I want. It's just an automatic thing that they think.
And that is I do write fantasy romance. So I write epic fantasy romance and historical fantasy romance, which those are my Scottish books. But that there is a little bit. I remember I got a couple years ago. I got a Kindle Daily Deal, which I was absolutely grateful for the first 2 books in this series, and the cover is rather fantasy-ish. It doesn't really shout. To me, it shouts romance, but maybe it didn't to these readers. And I did get a couple more on the negative side reviews that said, oh, too much romance, because there are a lot of classic fantasy readers that don't want romance in it. But it is a romance. It's epic fantasy. I made up a world. And
how can there be too much romance in romance?
Right. And that was basically Amazon's bad, because when they did the Kindle Daily Deal, they did it under the fantasy genre without the romance on there. But I mean, to me, if you look at the cover, it kind of clues you in, but whatever,
Yeah. Wow. Man, I would have been upset. I don't know. Should you be upset with Amazon, or should you be happy with Amazon,
I sold a whole bunch of books, so I was happy with Amazon.
Okay, well then it doesn't matter. Who cares?
Yeah, it's okay to have a couple of negative comments, when you're bathing in your tub of gold doubloons.
Right, there you go.
Or doing a Scrooge McDuck style dive.
It wasn't quite enough money to roll in, but it was a nice month.
Scrooge McDuck. I remember watching that as a kid, and just I don't know why, but I was like, that would never work. That would never work.
Because you had a basic understanding of physics, Stevie.
Yes. But as a kid, I thought you would just let that go. But me, I couldn't let it go. Yeah. It's weird. I'm not like that as a person. As a 26-year-old, when I watch a movie, I just let things happen.
Right.
And I bet you're the opposite.
A lot of things require us to suspend your disbelief. I recently saw a really good movie, Alpha. At the theater, and it takes place in 10,000 BC. And knowing a little bit about history, I went, no. But the movie was awesome. The story was great. I love stuff like that.
Did you? So you did. You took that contract and suspended what did you call it again? Because
suspending your disbelief.
So you took that contract.
Yeah.
You suspended your disbelief. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of your natural instinct to say, no, that could never happen. And you just have to put it aside to enjoy the story sometimes.
Yes, I totally.
Try to be convincing. It happens. That a lot of things in life, like a lot of things on TV, especially, all the law enforcement stuff, everybody goes, and anybody who knows anything about it are like, no, So you just have to take it for what it's worth. DNA does not come back in 24 hours like on TV,
Wait, it doesn't? I'm kidding.
No, sir.
How do you know this? That's the problem.
That's kind of my background. My degree is in criminal justice, and I worked in for 2 different cities in the courts for 9 years. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, okay.
is there an element of like detecting in your fantasy? Like we're about to read a little bit from a murder. Is there some mystery and detecting and plotting and solving and stuff?
Maybe a little bit. I also write romantic suspense, so I usually leave that part of the police procedural stuff over there in the real world and then my contemporaries. But maybe a little bit, but it would probably be subconscious. You kind of go and they use magic, so it's kind of a cheat, isn't it? When you use magic to do your investigating, but yeah, that I suppose that kind of stuff is inherent if you know about it. So,
Andy and I were talking about this about like really good quotes that we have in our book, and for me, it was the law of attraction and self-help. And I always, in my opinion, I do really well with the like the all-knowing wizard kind of character because I have the law of attraction stuff and universal like quotes work really well with that, and I always make it my own, and that's usually what people really enjoy. My brother's actually taking Criminology 101, and so far he's really enjoying it so far.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's what I studied in college, and it was pretty. And then I went to the police academy after college, but I ended up moving to Texas instead of pursuing law enforcement in Ohio, and I didn't want to go to the academy again here. So I settled for close when I got the job in the courts. I was the juvenile case manager. I've always worked with kids, and I work with kids currently, but it's always been kind of like a passion. I have several different passions, but it's one of them. So.
When I was in high school, I had a chance to go like to the police academy to see if I wanted to be a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was part of this like little club. And I remember they wanted to tase you and let you feel how that felt. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, my nephew is a police officer at a university in South Carolina, and he had to get tased. And we watched the video, and we kind of made fun of him. So,
I bet you didn't kind of make fun of him. I bet you just.
Yeah. Now, when I went to the academy, it was before tasers were a thing, so we didn't have to deal with that. But I did have to get. I didn't get sprayed, but we all had to get pepper spray.
Yeah, I hear that's even worse.
Yeah, you want to die. You want to die. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, I think now they make you go through an obstacle course too.
Yeah, well, it depends on the department, but yeah, some of them do. But I remember thinking, I don't know if I'm going to make it when they did that.
Yeah. Okay, before we move on, Johnny Knoxville says pepper spray is the worst thing that ever happened to him, and he's broken almost every bone in his body, and including had an eye pop out of its socket.
Ouch.
So pepper spray is that bad, apparently, where Johnny Knoxville, the king of pain, says that's the worst thing that's ever happened to him. So that's what I do when I procrastinate. I find these YouTube videos.
Right,
so
of course.
Today we have a very interesting topic. Of course, with any Fantasy Fiends podcast, we always have interesting topics that people usually don't think of, and that today's is sodomy. That's right, we're going over sodomy.
Okay.
Andy, why are you laughing? Today it's teenagers. We're talking about teenagers today, which goes really well with me because my whole series is based on a group of teenagers, even though it's not really for a super young audience. Yeah, it's definitely, I would say, well, it could be 14 and up, and I think 20 plus would get most benefit out of it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And my question for you, Chrissy, is why are we talking about that today?
Well, I work at a shelter for teenagers, and at my shelter we do 10 through 17. Of course, it's not often that we get the little ones. Right now we have an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old right now, but generally speaking, we get 15, 16, 17. That's the meat of the population. And most of my kids are in CPS custody and have been through some crap. And some of them are coming from foster placement. Some of them are headed to foster placements. A lot of them have trauma. Well, all of them have trauma. Some of them have PTSD. They have issues. And I do have a couple YA titles myself. They're not published yet. I'll get there someday. But I don't know. It's an important thing to realize. Kids, a lot of them really, people don't realize people take things for granted, basically. And kids in these situations, it's not their fault. Sometimes it's pretty tough.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've actually thought about something like that. When you say take for granted, do you mean you see the outside, you see the parents fighting, but you forget about the child that's under it, this upside down
That and
triangle?
that a little bit, but more like not everybody has it as good as most people have, you know.
Okay.
The quote the normal family, the normal kids.
Yes.
People don't realize that there are other situations out there.
Yeah, and the people you were talking about who are ignorant of this stuff are people like me who were fortunate enough to go through private schools, 95% Caucasian, and never saw anything like that. And then
Yeah.
I went my first year to public school as a senior, and I was so shocked.
Yeah.
I went to a ghetto high school in California. My choice. I don't know why I chose to do that. It was terrible. I've never been in a fight before until I went there. I learned a lot. I learned how to keep my mouth shut and that. So
did you though? Did you?
Kinda. As I got older, I mean, I never been messed with in my life. Let me just say that I'd never been messed
Yeah.
with by another kid, and yeah, and that year we had a suicide from a child who was being bullied by these
Oh God,
kids.
that's the worst. That one gets me in the gut.
And the sad thing is, 2 weeks before he did this, he had an A&M hat on, Texas A&M.
Yeah.
And I actually said words to this kid. So when this happened, I took a day off from school because I don't know if depressed is the word, but just kind of sick
You
to
probably
know.
have a little PTSD.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I was really upset about it because he was such a nice kid and I never would have known. I
Yeah.
know that's not the subject of today. So I'm guessing. Oh, my question is drug related. Are the kids ever come to your shelter? Is it drug related? Drug related issues.
Sometimes
Okay.
it really just depends. All their situations are different. We get kids who they're basically victims of their own circumstances if the parents get arrested for whatever reason, or most of them are CPS kids, which means that they are in state custody because they were taken away from their families for various reasons, abuse, sometimes drugs, like the parents are selling drugs or doing drugs and they can't be parents or are not choose not to be parents is how I feel about it. We take referrals from the community too. Like if a kid is having troubles at home with mom and dad, or sadly enough, a lot of times it's grandparents that are raising them, and the grandparents can't handle
Yeah.
them when they get in their teenage years, stuff like that. But
Yeah. I've met a lot of kids like that who are
yeah,
raised by their grandparents.
raised by someone else, raised by grandparents, raised by aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
It's rampant basically. For whatever reason, their parents are not the main caretakers. But yeah, sometimes we do get the ones that are addicted and they're trying to get off and they just came from drug rehab and they need somewhere to go before they go home or go to another placement. Or sometimes we get the ones that were selling drugs and they got in trouble basically, and then they end up with us. We only keep them for 90 days. We're a short-term placement.
That's short term.
Yes, yeah. And then
Okay.
after their 90 days, they're generally going to either foster care or residential treatment facility, which we call those RTCs, and there's several in Texas. Or sometimes they're going home, or sometimes they're coming from a family placement and going to a different family placement. And that's that's about one of the saddest ones is when they shove them around from family member to family member. That's really
I bet it creates a sense of not being wanted.
Oh, they all have that.
Oh,
They all
terrible.
have that. And then the ones that I guess that are most heartbreaking for me is when they have really crap parents, but they can't see that because they're a kid and all they want is their mom. And no matter what their mothers have done to them, they want their mom. And that's not something that you can tell them. Unfortunately, they need to, as soon as they grow up, they get that sense of understanding, wow, she really did me wrong. And then there's probably that trauma never goes away is what I would assume. But we just hope that we can get them to be functioning adults one day. And sometimes it doesn't feel like they ever will be, quote, normal, just because of what they've been through and how they handle it. They're so angry and they don't know what to do with that anger. righteously so. Righteously angry. But it's really hard to get them to channel that anger into something positive, and that can be different for every kid.
Now,
Some kids want to write, some kids draw, some kids want to punch something.
Now, let me ask you this, sort of segueing into the topic for the week, that teenagers can be heroes too. In nearly every single teenage-led story that I've read, I have never heard of a teenage story where the kid is from a happy home, well-adjusted. Right. It's always something. Now, taking this into real life, how many of the teenagers that you've dealt with do you see these like heroic traits, or what heroic traits would you say would be more common among the teenagers? Like, as an example, you've got these people who have to be really self-sufficient, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of them do have to be self-sufficient, but I would say overall perseverance. Like a lot of them, once they get it, like especially the ones that have been in the system for a while, once a lot of times they have that whole, they can't trust anybody, they don't know who to trust. If you can make a connection with them, which is what we try, that's our aim, where we work, we want to make connections with them, we want to teach them something, anything, coping skills. But once they get it, you see that potential and you see that perseverance, and hopefully that's what they learn, is not to give up. And so I would say that that's a common theme in a lot of YA novels that are successful. Now, my books really aren't YA, but they do have young characters because fantasy tends to have young characters. But that's what I would see. Segueing to real life, these kids, they've got so much potential. They just need a positive adult to help them tap into it. And so, you just hope to be that person. And if I can't be that person, I hope one day they go, you know what, Miss Chrissy was right, at least about one thing. Just give me one thing. Because we don't really see the outcome. That's the only sad thing about where I work, is we have them for such a short time that when they go on and they go somewhere else, I just hope that one day they get some kind of value in something I told them, That's all I can hope for.
How do they treat you?
Oh, it just depends.
Okay.
They can be pretty rough, and we do have high turnover because it is a stressful job. I've been working there for 13 years, so I'm like the longest employee, and I work overnight, so I work nights. My seeing them is kind of limited at this point, but because I've been there so long, I've worked every single shift every shift that we have. I've worked during the day, I've worked during the afternoon. At nighttime, as long as the kids are sleeping, I can write, and I also edit for other authors. So that's what I do when I'm there, because I have to stay awake all night. But, I do have interactions with the kids still, because some of them have night terror. Some of them get hungry at night. I do see them at night. Some of them have that emergency load of laundry that just has to get done now at 2:00 in the morning. But a lot of times when we're seeing them at night, it's because they wake up from a bad dream and they don't want to tell you. So they'll be like, "Can I have something to eat?" Stuff like that. Sometimes they treat us pretty bad. Sometimes they cuss us out. You just have to know that it's not the kid. That I try to. It's hard. It's a hard call, but I try to not attach the behavior to the child.
So in a way, bad dreams is another trope almost that would be based on real life. There are a lot of emotional and psychological scars that they're dealing with, and of course, these things tend to manifest through the subconscious form of dreams.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times over the years that a kid has woken up from a true night terror. It is a thing. It does happen, and each kid is a little bit different. I've had 16, 17-year-olds that wet the bed for various reasons. And of course, they never want to tell you that because that's embarrassing. So, that kind of stuff. But yeah, you would. The one thing that I could say about books in general is they never really, of course, they touch on it because they're trying to tell you a story and get your mind away from it. But they can't really touch on the reality of how bad it can actually be.
Yeah.
That's the sad thing. But I'm glad that some of those books that are out there do touch on it to bring some kind of awareness. Maybe somebody who reads it will know somebody that has been through that, or do some research about what is reality.
I feel like a book, if it really got into the complete picture of all of the different ways, it would be impossible for there to be a story, because stories are about character growth. So if you've got a kid who's dealing with night terrors, who's dealing with self-esteem issues, who's dealing with attachment issues, who's dealing with 10 or 20 different things, there's so many storylines that would never be resolved, because it'd be this 3,000 page book, because it would take so many years or so much time or so much story to deal with all these things. So that's why I think that some books, I know my books, I could never get into all of the psychological and emotional repercussions of the things that happen. So I focus on the ones that seem more, organic to the story. Yeah, exactly. Or the ones that I can actually resolve through the story, and then like that. But yeah, I think like if someone actually wrote a real book with a very complete picture, it'd be like an Angela's Ashes vibe. It would just be this
it would have to be. But the thing about it is even in real life, they do persevere. They do get over it. They can be functional. They do get jobs. It just depends on adults, really, because they've got to find that adult that they can finally make a lasting connection to, that can help them out of it. And we do have those people in real life that can make connections with kids where it matters. People, foster parents who actually do care, because there are a lot of them that are, in my opinion, are crap.
Yeah.
So, we do get the ones that are out there and that they are awesome. You just have to, they're rare. They're like diamonds. So
what I find interesting about that is it's two things just sprang to mind. Number one, in fantasy, you've got these much more physical professions, right? So you've got warrior, you've got mage, you've got whatever, and it tends to sort of give them this outlet, this physical outlet or magical outlet, whatever it is, for the emotions that they're dealing with. So in many ways, it's almost like fantasy gives them a better path to closure or catharsis, because they're dealing with so much anger, they pick up a sword and they start swinging it at someone, and that's much more a physical outlet than data entry.
Yeah, and it really does depend on the kid. Like, we have 2 punching bags, so at the shelter. So we do have kids that need that. Can I go punch the bag, please? And that's great. It's fine. And then we do have kids that want to do a mural on the wall because that's their outlet. So I mean, but you're right. If only they could just pick up a sword and start swinging in real life. As long as I'm not in the room, it's good. It's fine.
Or, the magical duel, or take Divergent, where there's all of everything that she can do, or and then the other one that sprang to mind was that often there are a lot more mentor type characters in fantasy. Like let's go with the classic, the mentor who teaches the skill, right? The older magician, the older assassin, the older warrior, the older whatever. And so it sort of gives them that parental bond. And I think that's one of the classic tropes in younger adult fantasy, because it's something that everybody wants. Everybody, even no matter, no one has the perfect family, right? Even people with a great family don't have a perfect family. So there's always some deficiency in your relationship with your mother, your father, your siblings. So finding that through a story, whether it's the guy who saves his comrade's life and they become brothers in arms, and that's something people with sibling issues, they really like that, where there's the older character who sort of takes the young character under their wing and teaches them and is patient with them, whether it's from a paternal role or a maternal role. Both of the, we can identify with those easily, because we all want that, that patient, understanding mother or father and all of that. So I think that's one thing that a lot of people really are drawn to about teen-aged characters in these stories, is because they give this, they showcase this dynamic that subconsciously we all really want.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah. We're all looking for that in real life. So it is easily identifiable. And a lot of the common, as you were talking, I'm thinking about fantasy things that I like, that one of my favorite, as a teenager, one of my favorite authors was Tamara Pierce, and her series with the female knight, Alana. I remember those books now, and I have not been a teenager for a very long time. So and I grew up reading Tanith Lee with the unicorn story, and she's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's where you have this awkward teenager that doesn't belong in some way, shape, or form, and they've got to make it work. There's so many fantasy books. I grew up reading it. Anne McCaffrey's my favorite. You know, all those books, the dragons and stuff. There's always that element in Anne McCaffrey's teenage series. It's the girl who doesn't. It's always like the girl that doesn't belong. You know.
Yeah, or there was like the one, the dragon singer who's got a terrible singing voice.
Singer, dragon drums.
Right, you know, like those things. That's one trope that's really stayed around because it's something that all of us can really connect with, and that's really what these stories are about: is finding this human connection with the characters, and through the characters, a little piece of the author in a way.
Right. Yeah. And so I think even as an adult, you feel the same way. You're looking for your tribe. You want to find somebody where you belong, because you can't. I mean, that's natural to find people that, unless you're a true loner and you just are like, screw it, I don't want to be around any people. Everybody's always looking for people, acceptance and belonging and camaraderie and that connection. So no matter whether that's fantasy or real life stuff.
And I want to add something to that. You know, I am a loner, but not by choice, which is interesting. I've always grown up with really high standards for myself. And if I meet somebody who I really like, you know, like, oh, he likes to play video game stuff, but then I find out he also does a lot of drugs, I won't hang out with them.
Correct.
And so it's come to the point where I have very, 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 very few friends. And sadly, I just lost one. He didn't die or anything. He just dropped off the face of the earth and I don't know why. That's a story for another time, though. But Andy has quickly become my best friend because of his work ethic and his morals. And he's just a great guy. And I know that doesn't have anything to do with the podcast, but you said something like that. And I was like, you know what? That's something I've been meditating on. I just wanted to say that. But an interesting part of fantasy that I like when, you know, coming of age series, or people like my books, Esh is my main character, and he is a troubled child, right? Abandoned in an orphanage to a very ghetto orphanage where everybody wants him dead because he's a hybrid, and hybrids are, you know, they usually end up dying by the age of 10. Yeah, so it's a very brutal territory that he's born into. My favorite thing to write is writing about the kid doesn't even know he wants an outlet, and then he finds it. So they put a sword in his hand. He's like, well, what do I do with this? And he's like, oh, this is nice. I like this. And then they take it too far. And that's what Esh does. He takes it too far, and he actually starts using that sword on people.
Okay.
But most books growing up, most fantasy books I read were male protagonists, coming of age, came from crappy homes.
Yeah.
Like Brent Weeks. What is that book? I haven't read
that.
Yeah, he came from a troubled home, right? He didn't even have a home. So I'm actually kind of interested. Do you have any tips for people who want to write about a troubled teenager?
I guess try to be realistic about it. You know, not everybody's life is puppies and rainbows. So you can tap into that if you want them to be from a troubled home. Just a easy one is have one of the parents be alcoholics and the kids kind of ignored. That's an easy one. You read that from time to time. And then the child has to make the choice not to be the same as their parents. If you want to be really mean, you can throw some abuse in there. When the meaner we are to the characters, the more they have to grow in that arc. So sometimes it makes for a really good story, even if it is kind of hard to write about.
Wouldn't you say that we also get more sympathetic with the protagonist?
Absolutely. And it's all about, especially at the beginning of the book, when you really need to grab the reader's attention, the more sympathetic, basically, you know, they say there's no original ideas out there anymore, that we're all writing. You know, it's hard to come up with something that's genuinely original. So where we need to tap into as writers, we need to tap into the reader's emotion immediately.
So
you have to tell on the feels, basically.
Here's a question for both of y'all. We've actually talked about different kinds of antagonists in the past, and do you think it's possible to have a whole book, a fantasy novel, where the antagonist is a troubled past?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember that the antagonist is also the hero of their own story. So that's whenever I write pretty good villains, and you have to keep that in mind. To be realistic, your villain cannot be horrifically evil, truly evil, there's got to be some kind of human element, or people will skip the POV parts with your villain in it. So
Andy
they have
has
to.
told me
They
that
have to
before.
be. They have to be human too. Uh-oh, did we lose Andy?
Yeah, we lost Andy, but you and I can keep going. He's talked enough on this podcast. But man, what were you saying? I really like that. And I read this self-help book that when you're talking to another person, in this case, that person is Saruman. You know, is it Saruman or Solomon? I always get Solomon and Saruman mixed up. It's Saruman, right? With an
From
R.
Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, Saruman.
Yes.
Saruman, yeah.
Saruman, yes.
I went to
Solomon.
private Catholic school, so I'm like thinking Solomon.
Solomon from the Bible?
Yeah, Solomon from the Bible. I've always gotten them mixed up.
Yeah.
So you can see what I was reading. I wasn't reading the Bible. I was reading the Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
What I should have been reading the Bible, which is I actually have gotten in trouble for that. But anyway, when we're talking to these antagonists or we're writing about them, I always like to think from a self-help book that I've read before, and it was any person you talk to, they are the most important to them. So the way you think about yourself, they think about themselves. They're the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that as far as villains are concerned, or antagonists in a novel, you have to make sure that they're well motivated, number one. And then you can pretty much get away with anything, because as long as they can be sympathetic to the reader, certain aspects, and still be, oh wow, I don't like that guy because he's really bad. But they are also the stars of the book. So that's how I always think about it too. You can't make them too cheesy, because there's got to be some sort of the reader has to see eye to eye with them, at least one aspect, or they have to be convincingly well motivated, or the reader's not going to want to read the parts that with the villain in them.
Yeah, one more thing. I'm going to let Andy say something because I've been talking for a while. I love it whenever I feel bad for the antagonist or the villain afterwards.
Yes.
Yes. It means the author did a really good job, in my opinion. And again, back to The Way of Shadows with Brent Weeks. This kid is, not to be like really brutal about it, but he's going to get raped by the bully. Yeah, he is. And you find out that the reason that was this kid's outlet, I'm guessing, because he was getting abused by people older than him.
That's also very realistic. That happens all the time.
So I read this book hating that character, and then afterwards I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. Then I felt bad for him. And then I have mixed emotions, and I'm like, wow, this author's doing a great job, because I have trauma right now.
Yeah.
So Andy, do you think we should get to the reading now?
I definitely think we should.
Yay!
This topic seems like it would be good for 2 episodes because it's a lot.
Definitely.
And Andy, another episode idea would be the subconscious acceptance of the contract to suspend disbelief. I love that. I love that idea, and it's something I just recently got into being on this podcast. That's the stuff you learn by being, a host to this stuff. Okay, so we are reading from. Hold on, I had it pulled up. Andy, do you have it pulled up?
Yep.
Okay, of course. Is it chapter 1?
It is chapter
1. This is the opening of the book.
So, guys, we are reading from Rogue's Call, and it is by C.A. Szarek. And if you look at the cover, it's like the classic fantasy cover that you grew up with when you went to the library to pick out a book. You would see this book on the bookshelf, like, okay, this is fantasy. It's got a wolf on it.
Yes, all my heroines are bonded to wolves.
You got to. I'm a big fan of wolves. So, okay, so we're gonna do the murder, and we're just doing chapter 1, Andy.
There's a little snippet at the beginning there.
Chapter 1, yeah. Break. It's kind of long, so.
Okay, to the break. Okay. So, Chrissy, do you want to go ahead and be the director of the show? How many parts are there? How many characters are there to read from?
There's the 2 main characters that have dialogue, I think. There's the king, and his name is Nathal. And then Murdoch, which is his right-hand man. He's the captain of his personal guard. And then I believe that there's some, one of my mages is in it too. His name is Rory. They all have dialogue. And then there's references to other characters. This can be a reference to the heroine. I don't believe she's named at this point in time. and they and then maybe several of the king's men are referred to.
Okay, Andy, how do you want to handle this?
I'm happy to read the king. Chrissy, do you want to do the narrator, or do you want to do some of the parts?
I do not want to do some of the parts.
Do you want to do narration then?
Yeah, sure, I can. Let me pull it up.
Okay.
I was not ready.
No. And Andy, I can play Murdoch?
Sure, yeah, if you want to do the individual parts.
Okay, I'll do that as well.
I'll do the king.
Okay.
Okay, so you just want me to start reading the narration and then you guys will do the dialogue?
Yeah, and you say that he said, she said stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, Stevie, the first line is yours.
Okay. Over here, Majesty. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you good?
They have Scottish accents if you want to play with that.
Highland or Lowland?
You don't have to.
Chrissy, is it Highland Scottish or Lowland Scottish?
Oh, Highland Scottish, of course.
Ooh, that's going to be a hard one, right?
You don't have to, though.
Oh, no, it's a challenge now. Okay, ready?
Yep.
Over here, Majesty.
Nathal tried not to sigh as he dismounted his white stallion destroyer. Dust puffed into the air as he thumped to the ground. His heels smarted, but he ignored the minor bother and handed the destrier's reins to his squire. He strode toward his lifelong friend and captain of his personal guard, Murdoch.
Not again.
But it had happened again, this time in his own province of Terraquist. He was well aware of what awaited him inside. It was the only reason he was here. Normally, his men handled these types of situations and reported them back to him. This was the third time, and Nathal needed to respond himself. As king, his people were his responsibility. He had to dip his head to enter the doorway of the crafter's cottage. The acrid smell of burned flesh and blood smacked him in the face and roiled his stomach. Bile rose. He swallowed, clearing his throat and exchanging a glance with one of his men.
Your Majesty.
Murdoch inclined his head. The large man was hunched over a female body. Her white blonde hair was stained deep red, matted at the back of her head. She lay face down on the wood-planked floor of the small home, both her arms bent at an odd angle. Her legs, too, were broken, facing opposite directions. Blood pooled beneath her.
Damn it.
I know it. His captain's auburn brows were drawn tight.
The third lass.
He was on a knee, careful to avoid the crimson coating the floor.
I believe it confirms they're looking for her. If the second did not, it's not a coincidence.
Aye, they're killing any lass who looks about the right age. If they don't get the right answers to the questions about magic, I'd wager to guess.
Nathal cursed long and hard, tightening his fists until his gauntlets creaked a protest.
My king, in here.
One of his knights called, peeking his head out of what had to be the main sleeping quarters of the cottage. The crafter home sat on its own parcel of land well outside the city of Terraquist, his capital. Although small, it was independent. According to the official royal records, it was owned by Fergal Onstead. Onstead was a farmer by trade and made the appropriate tithes, an upstanding citizen. No reports of any issues of any kind. The provost in charge of the area had confirmed. He, too, was outside with his marshals.
What is it, Tarman?
Nathal asked, but his stomach dipped, and he just knew.
2 laddies.
His heart plummeted. The look on the knight's face confirmed the children were dead, too. The woman, face down on the main living space, was probably their mother. He assumed she was Onstead's wife, Rohain, according to the records. He blew out a breath and went to the doorway, dread churning his gut. 2 small forms lay crumpled and broken on the woven rug. Nathal closed his eyes and looked away.
Blessed spirit.
Blood covered the room, the walls, and even the large bed.
They probably tried to hide.
Tarman's low voice was thick, the man obviously affected by the scene. Then again, who wouldn't be? Like himself, the knight was a father, too. Both lads were blonde, and they couldn't be more than 4 or 5 turns old. 2 small hands were entwined, despite their contorted bodies. The brothers were connected in death.
Any sign of the husband?
Nathal asked, called to no one in particular. His name is
Fergal Onstead.
Aye, Majesty.
Someone answered from the third and final room of the cottage.
Over here. He's burned badly.
Shite.
This was the third family decimated in the last 7 days. 3 young women, their husbands, and now the toll of children sat at 5.
Get Rory in here to sweep for magic.
Murdoch ordered, catching Nathal's eyes. He came back into the main living space. He nodded agreement and watched one of the lads dash outside.
Your Majesty?
The red-headed half-elfin mage bowed as he appeared in front of Nathal, but he did miss the lad's eyes resting on the dead lass before meeting his gaze. Rory brushed his bright hair out of his face, the movement drawing his attention to the magic user's long, tapered ear.
Where's your sister?
He asked. Unlike Rory, Idana was tiny, barely over 4.5 feet. She resembled a full-blooded elf more than her 6-foot-tall brother. Neither came close to Nathal's own 6 feet 7-inch frame. Few men did.
Probing outside, Majesty.
Good.
She doesn't need to see this carnage. Tell her to stay out there, mark the perimeter, and note any magic.
Rory gave a curt nod. He was still and silent, and although Nathal couldn't hear the message being relayed, there was no doubt the mage was thought sending to the other redhead. He and his twin were two of his most powerful mages and connected to each other much more so than his other mages because of their twin tie in elfin blood.
Tell me what you find here, lad.
Aye, Majesty.
The mage's chest heaved as if he'd taken a deep breath, and he closed his vivid green eyes. He spread his arms wide, and his skin started to glow.
Nathal.
Murdoch spoke low. Too low to have been overheard, so Nathal didn't chide him for calling him his given name. His captain rarely did so when they were in the company of their men, as it should be. They'd been lads together, trained together, and fought together, even married at the same time. He had no closer friend.
What is it?
He tore his gaze away from Rory and knelt next to his captain.
Look.
The man had flipped the lass's body over. Nathal glanced away from her mangled face and the burned flesh of her neck and collarbone. One of her ears was missing. He cursed again as his friend gently closed her sightless eyes. The lass's bodice and tunic were torn open, bearing her breasts. He murmured a prayer that the blessed spirit keep her soul safe. Anger and regret darted across Murdoch's face when he met his teal eyes.
A waste of one so young.
Aye, there is no greater waste. What do you find?
The captain pointed to a scorch mark high on her ribs on her right side.
I think they know about the birthmark.
Enough to look for it, aye. But this lass has none.
Aye, but this is new. Different from the other two deaths.
He gave a nod and sighed. Nathal chewed over that bit of information, but it was true.
Cover her up, Mel. She deserves dignity.
His captain worked quickly, straightening the damaged bodice as well as the smoothing bloody skirts. The lass's expression was serene in death, despite the horrors that had escorted her to the afterlife. He had to look away from everything that had been done to her. He'd seen many bloody battles in the time he'd been king, but the death of innocence never sat right in his gut, especially when this lass and her family, as well as the other two, had no idea what they'd done to become targets of evil.
Nothing. They didn't do a damn thing to deserve this. The question is, if they'd thought they'd actually found her, would they have killed or captured?
Nathal mused, trying to assuage the guilt churning in his gut.
Captured. They covered her magic, do they not?
Aye, so we've always assumed. But why?
He growled as he climbed to his feet.
They haven't established where they think she is. The first lass was from Western Greenwald. The second, North Escova. Why were these lasses targeted? 3 small holdings, none of the women were noble or married to noblemen. It's as if they don't know their real target at all.
Questions we need to answer, but thank the Blessed Spirit for any ignorance that'll play to our advantage.
Murdoch shook his head, whispering prayers over the lass. Neither of them had ever been considered holy men, not really, but in the face of the tragedy, and the other two, Nathal needed guidance. His people had been slaughtered. They deserved better. He would avenge them and protect his own as he always had.
Why would they come after her now? After all these turns?
His captain asked when he'd straightened.
How did they find out she's alive?
I know not, sire. We done what we could to protect her, to keep her hidden for almost 20 turns, but never did I fathom it'd be at the expense of 3 lasses and their families. Innocents murdered. We have to catch these bastards.
Aye, Murdoch, before anyone else is killed.
Nathal held himself responsible. He knew who they were looking for and where she resided.
Very well written.
Thank you.
My stomach is in knots.
That was very good.
Yeah!
That was good. Like, man, I kind of like after this episode want to ask you what happens. It kind of reminds me of Jack the Ripper.
Oh, well, basically, in a nutshell, not to give too much away, there's a really bad dude that's after my heroine because she's an elemental mage and she has control over all 4 elements, and that's really rare. Generally, in my world, if you're an elemental, you can do water or fire. You don't do all of them. And she is related to the king's wife. She's the king's wife's first cousin. So he's protected her. She was a baby. When she was a baby, the dude came after her, and what his shtick is that he is also an elemental, and he has the power to absorb powers. And of course, if he absorbs your powers, you die. So he's been doing that to extend his life, and it's almost at the end of this cycle. So he's looking for her because she's the most powerful elemental that he's ever come into contact with. So and then there's romance. So she falls in love with the knight that is charged with protecting her. Yay!
It's those. I haven't read any of those tropes in a really long time.
Mm.
The last time I watched Heroes, where one of the bad villains sucks the power out of people by opening up their heads or something. Is that right, Andy? Have you seen that?
Cool. Heroes? I love that series.
Yeah, that was a good series. So that's what that reminded me of.
Yeah.
But awesome. Where can people find you, Chrissy?
Well, I have a website, which is cazarek.com. And then my books are available at all the major retailers in print and ebook. And also the King's Riders in its entirety, there's 3 books and a novella, are also available in audio.
Ooh.
So,
very nice.
Even though we did an audio clip, I do have them available in audio. But I didn't have a guide to read them. I do have a female narrator, so she does a great job, but you guys did a really good job too.
Andy, how was my Scottish accent? I know it needs work.
It was
Lucky Charms-ish.
You're lucky that no Scotsman heard you.
I didn't think it was horrible, but he seemed like he was a mix of English and Scottish.
Yeah, he went all over the place with it. But it's okay.
I tried to do the English for the mage because I didn't know how to change my voice for all these different Scottish accents.
And that's why narrators who do that are so good, because they do have different voices. But yeah.
That sounds really tough.
Yeah, Rory and his sister Idana are in basically the hero of the first book. It's called Sword's Call, is half elfin. And half elfins are, in my world, they usually stay in the mountains with the elves because they are kind of persecuted when they come down where humans live. So just like the young man in your book, just for being half elfin, sometimes humans will kill them. Mm-hmm. So Joran is the first hero, and he's half elfin. Well, Rory and Idana are also half elfin, and I love them so much, even though they're basically tertiary characters at this point, but they will have their own stories because they're awesome. So Idana looks more like an elf. She's really short, and her brother's really tall. So they're interesting characters as well. Their mother was an elf, and their father was human. Same with Joran.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much. You know what? I don't know if you don't have to answer this question, but I see you have a tattoo.
I have tattoos. Yeah.
It looks like a fantasy-based one with swords, though.
This one on my arm, I don't know if you can see it. It is about all of my books. So it has a plaid running up through it, and it has a book, and it has a sword and a dragon, because there's also dragons in this series. And then it has police stuff on this side.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
I want to get another one, but I haven't yet. So
yeah, I'm looking to get my first tattoo first. In fact, I wish I had time to talk to Andy about it on this show, but we'll have to do a podcast on tattoos, I think.
Well, I love tattoos. I have 4.
I have 4. You have 4? Awesome. Andy, anything else you want to add?
Nope, that's it for me.
Cool. So again, if you want to read more, and I'm sure you do because that was a freaking awesome opening to book 3. So I can't imagine how good books 1 and book 2 are. You can find her on Amazon by searching C.A. Szarek. That's Szarek.
Yay.
Again, that's Szarek. Awesome. And this is the King's Rider series. That's right. The King's Rider series. So go ahead and check that out. And again, they are on Audible. So you can use one of your credits for one of those. Chrissy, thank you so much for being on the air with us today.
Thank you for having me. And I also have a map. There's a map in the beginning of the book.
I saw the map, and it looks so fantastical. It's so cool. Really great job with that.
Thanks. A friend of mine did that for me. So.
Well, I need friends like that. Andy, make me a map.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
My drawing skills are just so good.
They are. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the podcast. Does that sound good for everybody?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for watching the Fantasy Fiends podcast or listening wherever you are. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. That helps us out so much. If you're listening on iTunes, please drop us a review. We'd love you for that. And with that, we will see you this upcoming Thursday for another fantastical episode of the Fantasy Fiends podcast. Good night.